Well, good morning and welcome. And if you're still on the sides, if you'd like to take a seat at the table, we'd love to have you join us. You're all welcome to join us in this grand table. As for those of you that I've not met, I'm Jonathan Altmans, and I'm the president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network and chair of the GEC, and happy to officially open our Startup Nations meeting today. For those of you that don't know what Jen's Startup Nations community is, allow me, if I can, to provide a little bit of a briefing on it. When we first started becoming an advocacy organization for entrepreneurs 15 or 20 years ago, when I went to Silicon Valley, Californians often said to me, we want to secede from the union. We have no interest in Washington, D.C. And as far as we're concerned, there is, it's odd to be thinking of government in the same expression as entrepreneurship. Well, as we worked around the world, we realized that more and more governments, of course, were leading the entrepreneurial ecosystem development work. They didn't necessarily call it that, but governments were very involved. And Brad Feld, who is one of the, shall I say, the godfathers of the ecosystem building movement around the world, and the founder of Techstars, who'll be here, is here already and will be participating this afternoon. He was a great advocate that you need everybody around the table. We need policymakers, we need obviously investors, founders, the entrepreneurial support organizations, and the entire community. And so we've made a big effort over the last 10 to 12 years in ensuring that government has an equal seat at the table rather than a hierarchical approach of government is at the top and the rest of us are reporting to government. And it's been very successful. And a linchpin of that has been not only to have a formal government-only meeting, but also to make sure that we do it in the context of this Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which allows policymakers to interface with all of the others, from founders, investors, and ecosystem communities, because traditionally government has not had enough interface with the ecosystems that they're trying to nurture. And so across the world, we've built communities of people who focus on the regulatory issues and the policy issues around how do we remove barriers to entrepreneurship, how do we advance entrepreneurship. And for any of you that listened to my talk yesterday, of course, I issued a challenge to government that I think we need to have a bolder vision, and I think we need to be focusing a lot more on execution and implementation of some of the commonly perceived and recognized ideas. I want to recognize that, for example, when we look at the implementation of the Startup Act in Nigeria, for example, world-renowned example of not just how do you pass a bill, not just how do you decide what your policy is going to be, but how do you actually figure out that it's going to work and it's going to get through and it's going to be executed. And so you'll notice that at GEN, we not only have our Startup Nations community, but we also have our GEN Atlas, which is designed to provide a directory of great examples of how governments are solving similar problems to those that your community may be facing. So as a summary, let me say the purpose of this community is to allow domestic policy advisors across the world to have a collegiate relationship with their counterparts in other economies. And I phrase it that way because traditionally your interface as nations has been done through diplomatic channels. Your interface has been done, often through trade or tariff conversations or immigration conversations. We do this and in a much more collegiate fashion, that you are a peer group who often has the same challenges in front of you. I'll say we often have small informal working groups. There's a group of nations all working on a startup, on startup visas together, for example. The ones that successfully implemented it are sharing more information with those that are in the process of trying to do it. I hope that you'll recognize that this is an ongoing 365-day-a-year opportunity for you to be part of this community. It doesn't just give you access, of course, to the other policymakers, the Startup Nations community, but it gives you access, of course, to other actors in the GEN ecosystem. So I wanted to finally thank you all for being here. I hope that you will find the next 3 days very rewarding, and we look forward to this informal discussion here as like-minded leaders trying to lead on this difficult path of finding how do we be startup savvy as governments, and how do we make sure that we've removed as many of the barriers as possible to enable entrepreneurship in our economies. I want to thank so many of our longtime friends for being here. John Potter, I know OECD has been a great partner over the years, and it's nice to have Nathan. Thank you for coming all the way from running the International Economic Development Council. It's JF, thanks for being back here again. I could go around the table. It's great to have you here. I also noticed that we have the fearless leader of our Startup 20 G20 work that'll be soon happening in South Africa. So many more things to talk about. But thank you so much for being here. Look forward to meeting every one of you in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And hello, I'm Matt Smith. I'm the Vice President of Global Entrepreneurship Network, looking after the policy and research work in the Startup Nations community that Jonathan has just introduced. We have a very interesting agenda today. We're squeezing in a lot of contributions, and we want to balance insights from policymakers, from international organizations, and some advocates that are working to shape policy on behalf of entrepreneurs. As a very quick run through of agenda, just to kind of help you make sense of this, we're going to have 10 minutes talking with Dom about maintaining momentum amidst political change. We're going to be talking to Antonio from Startup Portugal about Portugal's startup revolution, what's happened over the last 10 years or so. We're going to dip into some of the international organizations, Startup Genome, OECD, and OECD Development Center, who are going to share their latest insights and resources with you. Then we're going to canter through a series of policymakers and countries to just get a sense of what's happening, what countries are innovating around policy-wise on entrepreneurship, some of the successes and challenges that they're facing, and some of the questions that they're asking themselves for discussion with their peers. We're going to loop back to some other international organizations, to UNCTAD, Innovation Growth Lab, and Innovation for Policy Foundation. And then we're going to wrap up with a conversation talking about entrepreneurship policymaking in the Trump era, what's new in the US, and what may the next few years look like in terms of supporting entrepreneurship. So I'm going to start by welcoming Dom Hallas, who is Exec Director of Startup Coalition in the UK, one of the strongest kind of entrepreneur lobbying organizations that we certainly recognize around the world. And conversation is very much about transition. So a lot of the time, you can spend a lot of time investing, building relationships with ministers, with officials, with advisors, and of course when elections come, when governments change, it can be very hard to manage that transition and kind of engage and have the same level of priority for entrepreneurship among an incoming government, an incoming minister, or similar. So, Dom, want to kind of firstly ask you to give a bit of background, bit of an introduction to Startup Coalition and how that came about, and maybe some opening remarks on what you've done, particularly in the last year, with the UK government and that rather large change.
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Matt. Thanks very much for having us. Just for context, everyone, so I'm Dom Hallas. I run the Startup Coalition, which is a lobbying organisation in the UK focused on the tech startup and scale-up community and developing out the policy environment for those kind of companies in the United Kingdom. We were founded in 2010, and actually that's pertinent for the sort of conversation that Matt's asking about, which is the political transition one, because at the same time as the Startup Coalition was founded in 2010, the British government changed to a Conservative government that has been in office subsequently for 14 years and only changed last year. And so what you saw in that time from 2010 when we were set up to today is this really significant increase in the sort of role that startups and scale-ups and technology companies played in the British economy. So if you look at the stats that show this, you have in 2014, the UK raised in total about sort of $4 billion worth of venture capital. And then in May last year, in May 2024, we raised $5 billion in 1 month. Right, so you've seen this really significant increase in the sort of scale of the ecosystem and the success of the ecosystem in that time. And we kind of really focus on the 3 core aspects that matter most for that. So access to talent, so that's immigration and skills policy. Access to capital, so the ability of people to raise the kind of money they need to deploy into their businesses. And then the regulatory environment that builds those businesses, whether it's the sort of horizontal issues that impact a lot of startups like data policy or procurement or platform regulation or competition, but also increasingly in the individual verticals of the economy where we're seeing more and more of those technology-enabled businesses thrive. But when we think about transition, then you've sort of seen this period of Conservative government in the UK where you've had this huge success of the technology startup ecosystem. And despite the sort of political bumps that Britain's had along the way, you know, Brexit chief among them, you actually also had a very supportive micro-policy climate for those kind of businesses develop. So you had a huge number of investment incentives that have been hugely successful in deploying capital into the ecosystem, specific targeted talent policy interventions that really helped as well. And the question was, how do we sustain that in a changing world? And so I think the biggest thing that I can emphasize here is that engaging really, really early and engaging throughout a process consistently. So, you know, we have the new Labour Party that have come in 2024, but we'd started our engagement with Labour and had engagement with Labour throughout since 2010, quite frankly. And what we saw consistently is through that time, how do you build up and understand and identify the champions within opposition parties and different folks in the ecosystem that are really, really engaged on the things that you care about. And they might not think about that in the exact same way, depending on exactly which part of the political spectrum they're in. They might not frame the questions in exactly the same way. But ultimately, if they're interested and engaged from their own perspective, there are ways of you understanding what the most impactful things you can then do within that context. The second thing that I think is different about engaging people when you think about opposition parties ultimately then are going to transition into government is because you don't have the heft of the state to support you when you're in opposition. You don't have all of the existing structure and civil service. Actually, outside groups and people who are thinking about engaging with policy-making processes can play a really important role in frankly just providing resource and support for the kind of policy work that's necessary when people start to think about how they might want to run the country. And so we did a lot of work with the Labour Party, who are now in power, on their startup review. But there was a sort of series of policy agenda work over a number of years that when you have more capacity as an external group or an ecosystem to call on, you're able to then funnel in the right kind of people who can provide that right kind of expertise that might not be available to a party that isn't in government and therefore doesn't have the civil service at their disposal. The third thing that I think is actually really important about sort of startup founders versus existing corporates or larger businesses is they can be a bit more kind of big P political depending on exactly how they think about the world. So one of the critical ways in which parties tend to campaign in the United Kingdom is they really want to show that they have the support of businesses or they have the support of entrepreneurs. And if you're a CEO of a large corporate in any country, quite frankly, the sort of ability to come in and back a particular political party that isn't in power can be hugely risky, right? And it has like business implications. But actually, what you find with startup founders is they'll just have their political views and they're going to say them because they're personally interested in those things. And so you can find these segments and different people that engage with politics in different ways because they have a perspective on it that isn't necessarily just related to their businesses, it's related to their personal perspectives. And how do you identify all those different people across the political spectrum and help to, in a sort of non-partisan way, funnel them to the different political parties and say, okay, well, here are a set of people who are tech founders or, you know, entrepreneurs that care about politics, but they roughly agree with you, you should talk to them. And here are, you know, on the other side, here are the people who agree with you and you should talk to them. And it allows you then in those moments to both, you know, have a voice that's clearly advocating and has a say in that debate, but at the same time be as supportive as possible as folks as they're building things out. And then the final thing that I think is really, really important is ultimately just embedding yourself in the structure that will remain. So in the UK, we have a long tradition of an apolitical civil service that remains throughout changes in governments. And ultimately, the ability of those people, those civil servants, to transition policy throughout any transition of government really, really matters. And we spent a lot of time working, obviously, consistently over a period of time to do that. And what we've achieved from that, I think, really clearly is progress on a bunch of different issues, but the most obvious of which is a significant amount of work on pension fund reform in the UK to be deploying more institutional capital into the startup ecosystem via the venture capital ecosystem. And what you've seen there really clearly is, under the last government, a really big commitment to making that happen, thanks to a really supportive Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, but that be very clearly transitioned in a cross-party way to the new government under the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Thank you. That's pretty thorough. And I do want to say this is a very open participatory discussion. So if you have questions for any of our speakers, please, Jose Miguel.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very interesting, but there's one dimension also we considered heavily in Latin American countries, and is the evaluation of the programs. So sometimes you can use the information of the evaluation of the programs. Normally this evaluation process done or asked by the Congress. So when you have this data, which is publicly available, and then it's heavily based on techniques and econometrics and etc., sometimes you have information that in a certain way avoids the next incoming government not to just wipe out in the program. For example, in Chile, we have the Startup Chile program, already have 15 years old, and have been there mainly because of the evaluation of the program. So this another dimension may help, I mean, at least in our countries, helps a lot in the avoid this time inconsistency problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, like I said, there's almost two different levels. There's fundamentally a kind of the conversations, like I said, that we would have with both ministers, but bubbling up from civil servants of what actually works fundamentally. And, we have, I think, in truth, we're talking about interventions that, for the most part, are relatively proven, right? Fundamentally, the question is, will politics change the situation, right? And ultimately, there's a question then of the evidence-building part of the work, which is absolutely there 100% and is there consistently. And any kind of narrative that we're trying to build is layered on top of that, evaluation. But ultimately, at the same time, like some people care about things or don't care about things that are bluntly often unrelated to the data and evidence. And in truth, like sometimes it's about telling a story that ties in with what people want to try and achieve and what they're trying to tell the wider electorate and public that really matters too.
And building on that, you were talking about terminology and telling the story that aligns with a political narrative. How varied have you found kind of the need to adapt your terminology and the fundamentals of entrepreneurship, job creation, innovation between the Conservative government and Labour?
Yeah, so I think, look, I think in truth that if you're working with really innovative, smallish businesses, generally speaking, they're pretty politically popular, right? Ultimately, nobody's there being like, I really hate those guys. But I do think that sometimes it's actually the story of what the ecosystem is achieving within society that shifts. So you have I think, under a Conservative government or a centre-right administration, it tends to be that business and job creation is perceived to be good in and of itself. Like, as in that is objectively a good thing, whereas actually the work that we're doing with Labour right now, and partially it's also a reflection of the transition that the technology ecosystem is making in the UK anyway, which is we've grown to a certain size, and the story we're really trying to tell is not simply this is good in and of itself, although it is, but this is in the impact that it's having on society, to the benefit of both society as a whole, but also the tax revenue that accrues that can then go back into public services that can then achieve the things that government would want to achieve.
That makes sense. And any tips for the policymakers in the audience as to kind of, from an advocacy perspective, how would you like to best engage them? What can they do to kind of work with you to tap into the founders' insights?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is going out and having conversations with folks in the ecosystem who can be supportive. Like ultimately, not just the folks in this room, but a huge number of people in different parts of the world where you are will have these deep insights and observations about how to improve the environment, and then also potentially the kind of people who can be supportive of the work that you want to try and achieve. And the more you're out there and engaging with those conversations, the more likely you are to find people who are actually useful.
Snappy, thank you. Any final questions for Dom before we move on? That is perfect timing. Don, thank you very much. So, moving on, very excited to welcome Antonio Dias-Martins, Executive Director of Startup Portugal, the state agency of sorts delivering entrepreneurship initiatives with the government. So really wanted to use this opportunity to dig into Portugal's journey, the startup journey, what's happened over Startup Portugal's existence, what is the state of entrepreneurship there these days, what are the challenges, the emerging priorities, and where do you see Portugal going next? These are all quite big questions.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Good morning to you all. I would start by saying that the title of the that you mentioned before is an interesting one, a revolution in startup world or in entrepreneurship in Portugal, and we feel that way really locally, because well, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the average investment by foreign VCs in Portuguese startups would be around 50 million euros a year. And we reached a record high in 2021 of 1.5 billion a year, 95% coming from foreign VCs. Well, since we have been mapping the ecosystem since Startup Portugal existence, we never seen so interesting numbers and such a growth in the number of startups and the impact that they have in the country. In 2024, we observed a growth in the number of startups of 16%, after in 2023 a growth of 11%. So even the investment value in times like we are living today, we've seen a significant recovery in 2024 numbers with a growth of 136% comparing to the previous year. And what we see is that, well, startups, we have currently about 5,000 startups in Portugal, and it's clear for everyone, but, well, mainly for the political decisioners and the government, that this is the type of companies that will change the Portuguese economy in the future. And that is a good starting point for deploying afterwards relevant public policies towards the development and the promotion of startups. According to our mapping, and we do it with an international and independent entity every year. According to our mapping, these 5,000 companies, they are special and different from the average SMEs in Portugal, as they grow in a faster pace. So they are growing 30% a year compounded annual growth rate in the last 3 years, comparing to 9% a year in the average SMEs. They pay more to their workers. So they pay about 70% more than the average SMEs. They export more. They export 60% of their revenues, which compares to 14% in the average SMEs. And in a country where the economy has been, well, in the last decades, a little bit anemic, or with the necessities of additional growth, drivers of growth, these companies are the perfect bet and the perfect strategy for that to happen. So we have been passing this message to the government. Startup Portugal was created in 2016 after by the government, after they concluded that the existent agencies weren't fast enough to deal with this new quick reality and this dynamic and vibrant reality of entrepreneurship and startups. So they created, we are not an agency, we are more flexible, we are not a public agency, so we are a kind of a public-private non-profit entity that has gained the status of public utility, and with this a regular funding from the government, but also we have funding from privates that support our initiatives, our programs. and we were given the responsibility by the government to design and deploy the national strategy for entrepreneurship. So I think this is a key point in the evolution of the entrepreneurship in Portugal and this momentum, because obviously that the main responsibility of the success of the startups are for their founders, but the adequate environment, the adequate set of public policies in place is really important and makes the difference. One thing that I would like to point out as a good example and as a good practice is that we are the sole representative of the ecosystem. So we don't have in the country any other association, entity, public or private or hybrid, that represents the ecosystem. And this is relevant because this doesn't happen in other countries in Europe. If you go to Spain, if you go to Germany, if you go to France, you have several associations fighting with each other in order to get more attention and more initiatives from the government. And this distracts, and this is a waste of energy and time, and it's not useful. So one good learning that we came to understand from this process is that it is important to be empowered, to be the global representative of the ecosystem and have a real capacity to go to the field, be listened by the founders, be listened by the ecosystem and the stakeholders, and then also have the technical capacity inside to transform these pains from the field into specific measures and specific proposals for the government. So we have to have this kind of, we have to be informal enough and, let's say, easy enough to talk to everybody, the community issues, building the community, events and all that with the field. But we have to also be credible enough with our own technical capacity that we have internally to transform the pains into well-argued propositions and proposals to the government. So we have lawyers inside, we have finance guys inside, we have people that know about public administration, about European laws. That is really relevant because otherwise you won't be heard by the decisions by the government, and you won't be able to make an impact. Okay, so this is a critical point. We are not kind of a syndicate or a startup association. As I told you, we are representatives of the whole ecosystem, and we have the capacity to get along and deal with different governments of different origins and different political areas. This is also a key aspect. So we are a team mate of the ones who are deciding and ruling, but with an independent position, with the capacity of saying no and argue when necessary. Okay, so again, another equilibrium that they have to trust in us, because we are not a syndicate, we are not aggressive, we are not going to be, publicly taking the carpet or putting them into a tough position. But when we don't agree, they know that we can make a difference in public opinion, in the stakeholders, and in media and all that. So it's really relevant to have that informal power of being at the table and having some negotiation capacity. Another important thing in this evolution is that we have a strategic board with 32 ecosystem representatives. We don't believe in defining public policies towards entrepreneurship in the closed room, in the cabinet, or inside the ministry. That doesn't work, okay? In this strategic board, we have 32 representatives of all the parties in the ecosystem, all stakeholders. We have unicorns, we have startups, we have scale-ups, we have incubators, we have universities, we have tech companies, we have consultants, we have public institutions. So, and this is really relevant because each politic that we propose, that we argue with the government, first goes through this strategic board, and goes through a deep discussion on the ones that are in the field, being actives in the entrepreneurship world. Also, it's really important to have rigorous data on the ecosystem. Those numbers that I told you before about the evolution of the Portuguese ecosystem, they are not our numbers, they are numbers coming from Dun & Bradstreet, and we do an annual study with them every year, and we are able to, in Portugal we have luckily the situation where companies have to deposit their accounts and register their accounts into public databases. So once we have access to that corporate databases, we have a real broad information about the companies. And this is relevant because with this information we can go to the government and show them exactly the power and the importance of this ecosystem.
Fantastic, thank you. Really interesting insights, and I think there's a lot to learn there in terms of that all-encompassing structure in a way that certainly France hasn't with its kind of La France Tech and the France Digital and others where there is, I think in the UK we can agree there's probably a little too much complexity and probably a few too many organizations on all sides of the ecosystem. Really appreciate the insight. I think we could talk far more about the exact structures of being able to deliver these things, some of the political changes taking place within certain countries at the moment, and perhaps some of the gridlock and logjams that elections can cause for these kind of activities. But we'll move on. Thank you, Antonio. We are going to come later to Bindi to talk about the European side of things as well. So we'll get the EU scale-up strategy insights in a bit. I'm going to move away from the policy advisors and move to some of our international partners now. And this is the point where we're switching it up a bit. We're going to be 5-minute presentations from this point on. To keep things moving, I think we're still scheduled to finish 11, so we'll work to that timeline. So firstly, very happy to introduce JF Gauthier, founder and CEO of the startup Genome. Jen and Genome have had a long-standing relationship. We've partnered on the Global Startup Ecosystem Report that the latest version is being launched next week at Vivatech in Paris. That's ranking ecosystems around the world. We've innovated around a new report, the Apex Nations, which is looking at kind of country-level ecosystems and ability for growth. So if we can load the Startup Genome slides, please. And JF, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So great to have so many peers around the table. It's great to be here. And thank you for really doing all your work to help startup ecosystems grow. We always know that the opportunity is so much bigger than what the governments really invest in the ecosystem. So we're doing the good work, and I think one thing that we wanted, I don't know if I can go back. I think maybe I went the wrong way. Here we go. Maybe not. Should not start with the slides. Aha. So one thing we wanted to add to the framework that we've had is get out of just cities, of course, and give some feedback on policy making to national governments. And we wanted to get out also of, just showing that the big and rich countries have bigger ecosystems. It's obvious to all of us, right? So we wanted to create a ranking that actually was fair and normalized by GDP, by populations, so that small countries, developing countries could be in the top, and really give a barometer of, given your potential, your economy, your laws, your R&D, your patent production, your talent, how well have you done in creating a startup ecosystem, an engine that is future-proof of job creation and economic growth? And so the first report is really benchmarking the effectiveness of past policies and translating that innovation potential into startup ecosystems. And of course, we all know it's the #1 engine of growth and job creation now as the corporate university R&D system. That's lots of economic power, but a lot of our clients still invest a lot more on the universities and corporate R&D system than the startup ecosystem. when we look at the ranking, you'll see right away that what is shocking is that some small countries are at the top. Right? Singapore, very small, Estonia, because they've done such a great job and they've never been ranked correctly, we think, in terms of like how well did they do policy with a small number of people do so much, right? Create such a thriving ecosystem. You see also Iceland. Iceland is actually extremely powerful, extremely productive with their assets, creating great startup ecosystems. So when we looked at it at the city level, I could see that for their size city, there's only Bristol in the UK that was competing with them. They were the most productive city at that size. And you see Kenya number 17th, right? They've done very well also. We see Brazil in 23rd, Nigeria in 25th. So you can see that the ranking allows to really rank the effort and the results of the policies. And when you look at the regional level, which I think is more useful because now you're comparing apples to apples, right? We try to create a report, a ranking that works for the top 20, but of course it breaks down when we compare oranges with pineapples, not even apples. And so at the regional level, it becomes more interesting. And you can see the ranking for Latin America, Asia, and of course Europe. I cut Europe down, but we have, of course, ranked all the countries. Of course, at one point, the data that we have on the big data sets are limited, so we ranked 80 countries for this time. But really then, the work is about then looking at current policies, right? The ranking is kind of past policy of the last 10 to 20 years, and now what are you doing right now is then the focus of the next step, is working with leaders of each country to really assess their policies, to give them feedback on what are their gaps, what can they do next to increase their performance. So we're going to allow them to identify the critical policy gaps, score them relative to the importance in driving economic impact. And as you probably know, we have a mathematical model of startup development and all these inputs compared to startup outputs. And then, of course, then give them best practices at the global and regional level. Of course, at the global level, it's best practices, but sometimes in contexts that don't relate to them. And at the regional level, oftentimes, this is more relevant to them. What did the next country, the country next door that's 10 ranks ahead, what did they do that I didn't do? Now, of course, the next step is AI, right? AI is going to create a lot of disruption, displace jobs, eliminates jobs, and all of the big institutions, of course, predict that. And what I like is they also say there's going to be almost as many jobs created. And of course, the problem is we all know that these jobs will be created in a very concentrated fashion unless we help them take action very quickly. And I see a lot of countries investing billions sometimes, or hundreds of millions when it's their means, into policies that are advised by the Google, the Amazon, the NVIDIA, etc. Say, build a lot of infrastructure, give us $1 billion, $2 billion, help your corporations transition, build a research institution, and develop talent. And it all makes sense and it's important, but all this money goes to Seattle and San Francisco, right? And they reserve almost nothing for startup ecosystem creation. I think there's 5 countries now that have really taken action, and not even 4 countries in 1 city. And when you invest in your startup ecosystem, if you reserve 25% of your budget at least, you invest in local people, hiring local talent, giving them experience in AI and in startup development that creates jobs in your country. And so that's our march. And then we show the slides, which is, right now, if you look at ecosystem value of startup genome being a very good proxy of job creation, and you apply that to AI with funding to AI native startups in the last 4 years, and you look at the funding of the last 2 years, you can see that 80% of funding went to US AI native startups, 80% of the world's funding. And then you see Canada, so we're at 90% of funding to 2 countries, and that's where the concentration of job could be. So we've created a startup policy advisory board or leadership council with Josh Lerner, Thomas Hellman, and leaders from the top cities so that we can start guiding our governments towards creating good policies. Thank you.
Thank you, JF. And we will be sure to share the Apex nations and other resources with you. And I think if you look on the Genome website, you can sign up for reminders on the GSER launch that will be coming out Wednesday 12th, I think, of June.
Yeah. Now, what to say at 11 a.m. With Josh, we'll have a session on room 2 or 3.
Check your app. Yes.
Hello, Matt. Hello, Matt.
Room 2.
Yeah, I think I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, please. Thank you. I just want to thank the last presenter for a good job.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, okay, my name is Anuka from Nigeria, Anuka Njan from Nigeria. Now I'm just wondering how you got the data from Sub-Saharan Africa, or the statistics, or maybe data from Sub-Saharan Africa to be able to grade. Because I know, especially in Nigeria, we don't have, very solid data to be able to grade. When you want to mix policy and what people have done and all that, we don't have that effective or maybe a good data to be able to grade. So I'm just wondering how you managed to do that. Thank you.
Well, we'd love to help you get better data, and we know it's difficult to get great data from Africa. Of course, we look at a lot of the data on the innovation potential, the traditional innovation system. We look at organizations like OECD and World Bank, etc., to give some data and a lot of global data sets on patent production. Patent production, we do it ourselves with a global database. On the startup side, of course, we know that the data is not great yet, and we'd love to help, right? I think we're partnering with all of the big data providers, Dealroom, Crunchbase, PitchBook, and now Traxon, so that we can bring data sets that you have into those data sets and make you look even better. And I think being able to rate you correctly would be great for the country to showcase how much you're doing.
Thank you. So we're going to move across a little push for time. So we are going to have just very quick 2-minute summaries. A few of our international organizations here are running sessions over the course of the next few days. OECD Development Center, IGL. So really want to give 2 minutes each to give a quick overview of what to expect in your upcoming workshop, what's coming out from you, or has come out recently. So want to go firstly, John Vasiliki, any choice? John, over to you. So a quick overview of what you are launching this week and hosting a session on, I think tomorrow, is it? Over to you, John.
Yeah, hello everybody. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock we have a session on entrepreneurial ecosystem measurement. And we're launching the OECD's new entrepreneurial ecosystems diagnostics report and tool. So it's an interesting tool. It is for OECD countries, the 38 OECD countries, but it is the sort of thing that can be extended and used elsewhere. And we worked closely with Eric Stam, and he'll be at the workshop as well. And he's done similar things to this in Europe and in Africa. So there's good potential. We're launching this as a sort of a first edition. And we've identified a number of areas where we'd like to do more with this, and probably come out with another version in 2027. Which hopefully could include some more countries and could include some more subnational data. So really that's the main thing. But because we've got so much work on, I wanted to point to just 2 other things that we've got. One thing is the OECD recommendation on SME and entrepreneurship policy, which came out in 2022. So that's the key reference, and that's what you can look at and review that recommendation in terms of how well you think your country's policies are aligned in areas like policy coordination, green and digital entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship finance. And then the last thing to point you to as a resource is our OECD framework for the evaluation of SME and entrepreneurship policies and programs, which is a really key document about how to evaluate reliably.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And your session is taking place tomorrow, 1 p.m., I believe, in session room 2. Looking at the new benchmarking tool, also looking at the Apex Nations tool, looking at the African Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Index that's been developed by Eric Stam and Pumlani of Stellenbosch as well. So a good way to dig into a few different new benchmarks and ecosystem performance measures. Going to call briefly on Vasiliki of OECD Development Center to highlight a session that's taking place in 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Exactly. Thank you, Matt, for giving me the floor. So we have a session at 11:15 at session room 3. It's about a new report we launched called Startup Asia, Chasing the Innovation Frontier. It is a book that implements a framework that we had developed in the OECD Development Center to assess policies for startups in developing countries. So we look at 5 key areas for startup policy: financing, services and connections, regulatory frameworks, transforming mindsets, and creating markets. And also we look at it through the growth stage and in tandem with understanding the growth dynamics and structural features of startup ecosystems. So in the session, I will be joined by Dr. Maliki, Deputy Minister of Planning and National Development of Indonesia, and also Dr. Kan Chanmeta, who is here with us, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Industry, Science, Technology, Innovation in Cambodia. So you will not hear so much from me, but you will hear from the 2 great speakers that we have about what is new in Asian ecosystems. This is a line of work that we're very keen to continue expanding, hopefully in Africa in the future. In the past, we have implemented this in Latin America. Of course, with the inspiration of Chile, that was one of the first case studies that we explored with the Corfo Startup Chile. And that's it on my side.
Perfect, thank you. And this is a bit of a shout out of different sessions, but I'm conscious that you can't go to all of them, and by putting it on the record here, it will be part of our AI summary that goes onto the website, and it allows us to then pull in all the information and present it to you, and you'll get the links through to the other sessions, etc., and the reports that have been mentioned today. I'm going to go back to some policymakers and start getting some updates, 5 minutes, on state of entrepreneurship, new initiatives, what countries are grappling with at the moment. Very excited to welcome Daniel Garcia, Director of Entrepreneurship of the Ministry of Entrepreneurship, Micro Enterprises and there we go, of Brazil. Brand new-ish ministry, 3-4-ish years old. Really interesting challenge. Of course, a number of new ministries of entrepreneurship have launched around the world in recent years, Algeria being a notable one, Brazil being another. So just that challenge of getting a new ministry up and running, building the team, really kind of seizing control of the agenda, making sense of what's the priority to advance entrepreneurship. I think Brazil is a fascinating country to have that challenge with. So Daniel, please, we'd love to hear about your journey and what's happening in Brazilian entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. To follow the 5 minutes, I made a statement collecting some policies that we are building and some data of our environment. Dear friends, it's an honor to be here representing the Ministry of Entrepreneurship of Brazil, a newly created office that reflects our country's commitment to strengthening a new cycle of productive, social, and innovative development. My thanks to Matt and the Global Entrepreneurship Congress for creating spaces like this one, where policymakers from around the world can share, learn, and align efforts for global impact. Brazil is an emerging entrepreneurship powerhouse. We have nearly 24 million formal small business, responsible for 60% of all jobs, formal jobs, 27% of our GDP, and 99% of all companies. We also rank 6th globally in the number of establishment entrepreneurs. But this strength is often built under pressure, and that's where our policy come on. We are focused on 3 key programs. The first one is Desenrola PJ, is for juridic person, which has renegotiated over $1.34 billion in small business debt, supporting nearly 200,000 operations. The second one is Procred, the largest microcredit initiative in Brazil history, with over 72,000 micro-entrepreneurs reached and more than $393 million in credit distributed. And the third one is Contrata Mais Brasil, is a digital platform linking micro-entrepreneurs to public sector procurement, unlocking access to over $98 billion in annual public contracts. One core highlight is Procred, gender-sensitive design. Business led by women can access up to 60% of their previous year revenue in credit. Those led by men up to 30%. Today, half of our credit distribution is going to women. It's a concrete step to our financial equity. This connects to our national strategy for women's entrepreneurship, a collaborative platform joining federal institutions, public banks, development agents, private sector, and civil society to co-create inclusive and data-driven policies. Yet, structural challenges persist. In Brazil, most become entrepreneurs of necessity, not opportunity. We must shift to a culture where entrepreneurship means choice, creativity, and innovation, not just survival. The Ministry of Entrepreneurship is a foundational step in this shift. We are combining economy and educational policies to build a new generation of entrepreneurs. One example of that is the program PED-MEIA. It's a saving program for public high school students benefiting 4 million young people with more than $1.25 billion in investment. Building on that, our ministry, we are launching another pilot program called Pé no Futuro. It's a program offering practical entrepreneurial education to recent graduates facing uncertain job perspective. It will be implemented through Brazil Federal Institution of Education and consist in 3 big stages, incubation, acceleration, and monitoring. We aim to pass national legislation to scale this initiative, expanding opportunities for young people across Brazil. Our country is mobilized to turn its creativity energy into sustainable development and real innovation. We are here to collaborate, learn, and grow together. As every entrepreneur knows, and as every new ministry knows and learns as well, the first 24 months are really difficult. Last year, we built our institutional foundation, and this year, we are delivering results. And we know our responsibility has only grown. Today, ordinary Brazilians like Dona Maria, Senhor Hwang, the real Brazil, have a public structure that exists to help them grow as entrepreneurs. Making the system work is how Brazil will connect to a future that's already here. Thank you very much. Oh, just on time.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Daniel, and really interesting to hear.
I really followed the 5 minutes.
I can encourage everyone to follow that as well. I'm jumping around a bit here. I want to actually come to Bindi, if I may. So Bindi Karia, many things, one of which is ambassador of the European Investment Innovation Council, former board member. There was a rather notable publication launched just last week in the EU. Would love you to kind of brief us on it and what you think the impact may be for, and the opportunity for entrepreneurship in the European Union.
Well, I think, thanks, Matt, for the opportunity. I think it might be worthwhile giving a bit of history because I think this is quite relevant for everyone around the room. This has been a 10-year journey. So in late 2014, Commissioner Neelie Kroes, she launched the Startup Europe project. Antonio, I can see you know all of this, so sorry if I'm repeating. 2015, the Startup Europe project was launched, and that was really to fund 4 ecosystem organizations across 4 different countries. So we funded one of Chris's projects from Nesta in the UK, back when UK was part of EU. And that actually went on for 4 years. Out of that, Commissioner Moedas, who is now the Mayor of Lisbon, launched the European Innovation Council in end of 2017. Since 2017, there have been sort of 4 different types of boards. The first 2 boards, and this is really important, really used the insights from private sector. So I sat on the Startup Europe board. I then sat on the first 4 years of the boards. They had, scale-ups, unicorn founders. They had heads of research. They had universities. They had basically everyone across the ecosystem advising the EU centrally about how to go about this and how to launch the fund. And what I found very fascinating is they actually took us seriously. So I remember in about 2021, we were really pushing about funding women and diverse ventures. And as a result, I was the co-chair of the diversity working group. And as a result, the EU committed to allocating 25% of their funding to diversity and gender. And that's because there were 50% women on the board, and we really pushed them, and they listened. So I think that was really interesting. The EIC fund then launched in 2021. And sorry, I've got to read all the statistics because there's so much. And that, the EIC, the program is a budget of 10.1 billion euros to support game-changing deep tech innovations from the life cycle of early stage research to proof of concept to technology transfer and the financing and scaling to the scale up of startups and SMEs. So it was the whole actual value chain. And there was always a funding issue in UK and Europe around how do you fund that early stage innovation as it's spinning out. Now, the EIC board continues, and they're on the version 3 of that board, and my last understanding is about 2,500 people have applied for the board call that went out about a month ago. In terms of the investment record, this is actually quite impressive. Since the launch, like about 8 years ago, the fund is one of the largest early stage deep tech investors in Europe. 150 investment rounds and 60 rounds in 2024 alone. And they're actually launching a scale-up fund to, help them hit that level of scale. They've done co-investment with VCs, so this is very interesting. They're starting to crowd in and lean in with the VCs. It's about 2.6 billion euros in co-investment in direct equity rounds. So they're not just doing grants, they're doing equity, and that's been very, very fascinating. There's a results report which I'm happy to share with you after. I've got the link, so come find me. But in terms of the growth trajectory, 70 EIC-backed companies have achieved Centaur status, achieving valuations of 100 million plus, and 6 of them are 500 million euros plus. It's a 50% increase in both growth and employment and turnover. Now, on the back of that, in early 2025, the startup minister, the commissioner for startups was announced, and then about a week ago, the startup and scale-up strategy was announced. And really the high level on that is some key initiatives around an innovation-friendly regulation. So there was a private sector group that campaigned for, why don't we create something as simple as a Delaware-style registration for companies in Europe? Bingo, they're actually talking about it in the strategy. better finance. And that is not just from government, but it is from local countries and government, but also crowding in with the VCs. Growth and talent is key. Attracting talent, maintaining talent, and becoming competitive compared to US and China, because that really is the fundamental reason that a lot of this was found. Infrastructure access as well, and it's providing easier access to research and technology infrastructures. So I have a lot to say, so if you want to come find me after, I can share the scale-up report and the results report of what has happened in that 10 billion euros of investment. So thank you very much.
I'm impressed that you managed to consolidate 10 years of EU innovation policy into 5 minutes. I think that deserves an award itself. And we
lived through it all, that's why.
Yeah. We would love to do more to dig down into that journey in history, and as I say, would welcome resources from you, but I think we may be tapping you and others to do a Startup Nations webinar at some point in the near future to talk through implications and lessons for other nations as well. Thank you, Bindi. I'm going to move next door to Oman. So Jalal Al-Hadrami, Manager of Small Medium Enterprises Development in the Investment Authority of Oman. Jalal, Oman has been going through a phenomenal kind of rise in entrepreneurial development. The authority is at the heart of it, kind of channeling funding into entrepreneurs. Would love to hear some updates and an introduction to the Omani entrepreneurial ecosystem for those that have not encountered it before.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Good morning, everybody. So Oman is a population of 5 million, which is a very small population. However, 60% approximately out of it is youth, which gives a huge pressure to give different opportunities to youth, either in the government and private sector, as well as entrepreneurship. So within the SME Authority, as well as Oman Investment Authority, we have tried to find different programs. But as we mentioned, the base of it is having good policies, great frameworks that can be adaptable and allow SMEs and startups to grow accordingly. And the first thing we have done in the past 4 years is to create framework and policies that ease the business to the startups and SMEs and make sure that they don't only do business in Oman, but they also can expand and do business in the GCC as well. And that's the first step, and it was really, really successful. After we made the base, we started testing new initiatives and programs to check if they are possible. And the first thing we have done, for example, vendor development program, which is a program that allows SMEs and startups to get a trial contract within the big corporates and government companies without the competition with the sharks or the big companies. This trial contract of 12 months to 72 months allowed us to nurture SMEs, let them grow, and then be able to compete in the future. We also tried to ring-fence some of the contracts, a percentage of the contracts, so SMEs can compete alone without the competition and the interference with the big companies with them. We introduced Future Fund Oman, which is a $5 billion investment. 10% of it goes to SMEs and startups investment. What we also did within the government companies, we introduced BTM, Business Technology Mapping practice, which is a practice that allows government companies as big corporates to understand their challenges and opportunities. Then we float these challenges and opportunities to the market, specifically to startups and SMEs, to get their innovative solutions. And any SME that is able to get an innovative solution, we can give them a pilot contract and a fund within the same time, at the same time as well. BTM worked well. It was done in 2023, and the results are coming now great. So this is what we have tried. We created the policies, the funding, but as well as we allowed the sales contract to be easy for SMEs and startups to make sure that the cycle is complete. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's remarkable timing. Again, fascinating ecosystem, fascinating country, and really appreciate that you can join us and share that journey with us. I'm going to switch over here, and I'm going to invite Shishindra of the ICT Development Agency of Sri Lanka to give us a bit of an update as to all things entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka, overview of the policy environment, what are the priorities of the government, and what's coming up next. Please.
Thank you, Matt. You can call me Sachi, otherwise my full name is a tongue twister. In Sri Lanka, we've seen an entire change of government during the past year. That's a major thing. During the past 10 years of me working for government, I've worked under 5 presidents and 5 governments, and each government has its own view of supporting entrepreneurs and especially tech entrepreneurs. But since of last November, during these past 6 months, we've had a new president, a new parliament, and a new set of provincial councils, all under one party. So we are having a new strategy for 5 years, and we are seeing that consistency which we couldn't see during the past 10 years, which for entrepreneurship or any type of policy really matters. This new government has 3 major policies, which is 1, poverty alleviation. 2nd would be clean Sri Lanka. Clean not only in terms of environment, it's the cleansing of attitudes, it's everything overhauling in terms of wellness and everything else, which is the meaning of clean. 3rd is digital economy, which comes to the point of the growth that we want to see in the next 5 years will be enabled through digital. The entrepreneurs right now have been going on a path where we've seen certain growth taking place, but right now in the next 5 years, we are looking for acceleration based on a digital, what we call digital public infrastructure. And this digital public infrastructure, which also will include digital public goods for those who know the terminology. And this digital public infrastructure will pave way for innovation. As an example, the various ministries, various departments will be connected through one secure platform, which will enable startups to access those through APIs, where data sets of multiple ministries and even private sector will be shared, so that sandboxes can take place where new innovation will be done through these sandboxes, because now the data is being made available, and that digital public infrastructure will have a digital identity, which some of the countries here would already have. And this is what we will see enable the acceleration of our innovation economy, and starting with use cases in Sri Lanka, solving some of these problems in Sri Lanka, where they'll be getting these referrals and scaling to other countries. So that's a major initiative that is taking place entitled with the digital economy. And of course, the AI strategy that has been put in place in Sri Lanka will use this similar approach, where infrastructure and data being available will result in many different AI applications. And with the talent pool doubling during the past 3 years, which is technology talent in Sri Lanka, and that's what we foresee digital being one of the major areas of entrepreneurship taking Sri Lanka forward. Our target is $5 billion of export revenue through this digital industry by 2030, $5 billion. Right now, we are about $1.5 billion, so that's tripling it. And the export revenue of the country to be pushed to $32 billion from $14 billion, which is now, during the next 5 years, especially supported through digital as an enabler and digital as an industry. And the digital economy, which is the financial economy, which is right now about $1 billion of e-commerce transactions taking place, to become $15 billion by 2030, which means Sri Lanka is going cashless, fintechs are going to operate, and through the digital public infrastructure, we are going to see an entire overhaul of digital commerce in Sri Lanka. In terms of major policies or initiatives, we are very aggressively looking at a overhaul of the venture fund ecosystem in Sri Lanka, where more tax structures being conducive of venture capital funds like tax pass-through structures, which have been implemented, much more lenient exchange control regulations, which will lead into a fund of funds that the government is now setting up, with government being a major part of it, and then other investors coming on board, which will hopefully attract more venture funds to come and set up in Sri Lanka. Of course, the question is the startup funnel also being built at the same time. This is a chicken and egg story. I'm sure some of the ecosystems will have realized that, for the venture funds to be attracted and the startups to be built. So we have very specific strategies that we have implemented for both, so that both will happen at the same time, enabling us to reach that $5 billion digital industry target by 2030. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much. Getting towards the end, we're still on schedule, which is thank you to everyone for helping on that. I'd like to call on Jose Miguel, of Executive Vice President of Corfo in Chile, notable agency that's been kind of, again, across a whole load of things, most notable many years ago for the Startup Chile initiative. But Jose, would love to get an update on the vast activities of Corfo, the overall state of entrepreneurship in Chile, and what are the priorities going forward? In 5 minutes.
It's like the European case. Huh? Okay, well, thank you very much. As you may know, the policy behind supporting entrepreneurs in Chile have already more than 20 years and have been consistent through time, which is a very unique particularity of Latin American countries, I have to say. Among them, the first one is the creation of, the risk funds. And then 20 years ago, and then Startup Chile 15 years ago. So I'm going to stress, 3 things that we now see, which are now doing this administration, which is mainly adding new things over that things and policies have already been done. I'm going to separate them between supply side ones and demand side ones. And then on the supply side ones, and I divide it in terms of financial ones and non-financial ones. Okay? So starting with the supply side, financial ones, there are 2 things that we're doing during this administration, which I think is very relevant. The first one, we create special programs for firms who are exiting, the programs like Startup Chile, to exit and to be listed in the Chilean stock exchange. For that, we have an arrangement. We have to change a little bit of the laws related with, all this process. So nowadays, firms, and we gave them as a Corfo a guarantee to help them to the process to become listed in the Chilean stock exchange, which is one of the alternatives that normally startups has. Just to give an idea, until 2022, for 5 years, there were non-listed firm in the Chilean stock exchange. And in the last year and a half, there are already 5 of them coming from this program. It's called Scale X. And then we have a list of 10 in the coming year and a half in the future, which makes things very relevant for those who want to go through that way, at least in the Chilean case. And the other thing which is very interesting is now we will call the institutions funding coming from the pension funds and the insurance companies co-invest directly in these startups in the Chilean stock exchange. This is one of the measures that we worked during this administration, have worked quite well. The second one, probably you're not aware, in Chile we don't have any development bank yet. So we're now creating one, and it's already created. And one of the major programs that this bank will have is exactly what's already been said in the case of Sri Lanka, a funds of funds. We're building the funds of funds because already we have 80 private and public supported risk funds. So the funds of funds now have like 80 alternatives where you can invest. Some of the funds are coming from abroad, some privately managed, of course, and some of them are created here in Chile, meaning in Chile. So these are the 2 things I'm doing on the financial side, which I think is very important. On the non-financial side, we discovered after some years that, Startup Chile as a program, in a certain way, the way it's designed, slightly skewed the kind of project towards digitally and, algorithm-based entrepreneurs because of the way of the Chilean, the public support. What we have in mind and what is the gap that we want to fill is for those entrepreneurs which are mainly science-based ones. What the characteristic of this kind of entrepreneurs is normally they need, infrastructure and labs, which Startup Chile, the program does not provide yet. So we just launched what is called Startup Labs Chile, which is mainly we're providing a score for $10 million for inner infrastructure for certain labs, in terms of to be physically together in one building. So we just launched it and, allocated that for Santiago, which is the main capital, and now we have a public tender for two more, in between 2 or more, depends on the budget, 2 or 3 more on different regions in Chile. And they will skew those bias in terms of certain technologies. The first one in Santiago is clean technology, because you have to define the technologies, and then you have the consistency with the labs, dry labs and wet labs, etc. So the public support is related with the labs, the infrastructure. So, the whole process to complement what is going on the Startup Chile accelerator, then you have Startup Labs. So this is a non-financial and a very important thing, and this is going to be done in the coming months. So this is on the supply side. And finally, on the demand side, one of the problems that all these firms that you all know, the entrepreneurs, sometimes they have to discover their demand, which is very complicated. And one of the very interesting demands, at least in the case of most of the countries, is the public sector. That the problem with the public sector, at least in Latin American countries, is the way that they do, public procurement. The way it's normally done in our countries is the problem is already defined by the public sector, and they do the launch where can provide the best and the cheapest alternative. We changed the law of public procurement, and then now including what is called innovative public procurement. So now the state is allowed to make tenders of problems following the Spanish mechanism, which is very interesting, not the solutions. So once you have problems, then startups may have a demand coming from the public sector, which have a lot of potential because they can increase. For example, it's one hospital, then can be scaled up, the solution for all hospitals around the country. So this is roughly what the news about Chile in these days.
Fantastic, thank you. That now concludes the contributions from policymakers. Apologies, we couldn't fit everyone in. The aim of this, and it's quite unfair really, isn't it, to try and challenge each of you to spend 5 minutes summarizing the entire state of entrepreneurship and your policy environment in your country. But really the aim of this is to give you a smattering of insights and inspiration and show just the level of activity that's taking place in countries and governments around the world and show really the value of the Startup Nations community to bring yourselves and others together to share these approaches and experiences. What I will highlight is that the examples and case studies and policies that have been noted today. One of our ways in which we document them, which Jonathan mentioned earlier, is our Gen Atlas. We believe it is the world's largest entrepreneurship policy compendium with something like 480 different case studies from 85 countries so far. That is quite a methodical approach by Tom to flesh these out. And if you have examples of case studies of policies, programs, and entrepreneurship strategies that you would like to add to that atlas, please do talk to myself and Tom, and we'll get them documented. One of the use cases we have for that is once we've developed a sufficient number of case studies on, say, entrepreneur visas, what Tom can then do is draft a policy guide on looking at the different approaches that governments have taken, some of the building blocks of what a successful entrepreneur visa looks like, and things like that. So we're going to take a handful of final remarks from some of our international partners, really 2 minutes each, I'm afraid, due to timing. And we're going to close out by talking about policymaking in the US in the new era, which I'm very excited about. So I want to call on Arlette, if I may, head of entrepreneurship at UNCTAD. Involved in, responsible for the Emprotech centres, advising governments on national entrepreneurship strategies, updating the current youth entrepreneurship guide, and more. So Arlette, 2 minutes, if you may, on all things UNCTAD that those around the room should know about.
Okay, that will be challenging, but thank you, Matt. I'll take it. No, I don't want to talk about all the work we do, but however, of course, we're there for governments to help them policy advise, and through our Empretech centers, business development centers, where we have certified trainers and training courses where we can help entrepreneurship in capacity building. But here, soon we're going to launch a report on AI and entrepreneurship, and it's a bit different than the things you have most of all been able to read or say, because this is more focused on the insights, the perspective of the Global South. And we have, it's soon coming out, we have 3 key messages, but I will quickly walk you through. What is important for us is that while every technology has a breakthrough, urgency is key. As the risk exists that existing divides are further widened. This is a big concern we have, and I think GF also mentioned already earlier on. I very much liked your intervention because it was spot on what I was also going to say. So we feel that considering the significant transformative impact of AI on business and society, governance is required. A policy and regulatory framework needs to be built that allows for safe and trustworthy adoption, development, and use of AI in line with ethics, values, and norms. Now, we have 3 key messages out of that report that will come out soon that I will walk you through quickly. The first one is that AI should be integrated into national development plans. Aligning AI strategies with national priorities ensures AI drives inclusive socioeconomic progress and avoids deepening sectoral divides by increasing productivity and fostering inclusive growth. Our second key message is that AI policies are sector-specific. One-size-fits-all regulations don't work. Different industries face unique challenges with AI. Smarter policies with the support of industry experts can offer clear and adaptable guidance that supports innovation, all the while protecting consumers. Our third key message, and I quickly walk you through this, is that entrepreneurs need targeted AI skills training, both in upskilling, reskilling, but even at leadership level to understand what is needed in order to take informed decisions. Fundraising, I also wanted to say something on that. Investors are not always tech savvy, and hence they are not able to look at technical files and approve funding, which can hinder, of course, the introduction of AI tools in many businesses. Now, we at UNCTAD, we stand ready to help governments in this area, as I mentioned already, either through policy advice or our Empretech program, and I will leave it at that. Thanks, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump over Albert. Hello. We are rapidly running out of time. Apologies. But you have a session coming up. I forget when. Today, tomorrow? Tomorrow. There we go. Innovation Growth Lab, all things policy experimentation. Do you want to give 2 minutes on what to expect tomorrow and what people can learn from your session?
Maybe, yes, 2 minutes. I did talk yesterday to many of you about policy experimentation, so I wanted to do 2 things in these 2 minutes. One is just give a couple examples of things that we've been doing and we've seen around the world that people are doing in this space, and I guess, tell you more about what's happening tomorrow. So one of the things we've been doing at IGL has been helping governments to become more experimental, and one thing that we've seen is how many governments are starting to build their internal infrastructure for policy experimentation. So we've been working with the European Commission to see how to embed experimentation in Horizon, in the framework program, and make it much more experimental in design. We've been working, for instance, we've seen governments that are starting to create, let's call them, internal strategic brain for their policy making. And for instance, the UK government, we've been helping them set up their first experiments as part of their meta science unit, which is an internal brain designed to think, to improve the impact of research and innovation funding in the UK. So that's one bit of things that we're seeing, and we're seeing of more governments starting to build these internal capabilities. The other thing that we've seen recently is also much more interest in exploiting the value of the data that governments have using kind of data science, AI, and other methods. And an example of that, for instance, we've been working with the European Innovation Council. They have amazing data on most of the most promising innovative companies around Europe, that they are not getting as much value as they could to inform policies, but also to help researchers work in this area. So we've been helping them thinking how they can embed, use AI, data science to get more value from this data, but also how they can open up in a safe way this data to academics from around the world. And we've been helping on this process. Something, I guess, another kind of last bit I wanted to mention is one of the areas that many of you have mentioned is, how do we move from digital or beyond digital to deep tech startups? How do we support science commercialization of kind of deep tech? And here we launched a few, just 20 seconds, sorry. We launched a few weeks ago a handbook with over 100 ideas of potential experiments that could be done to accelerate science commercialization and business-to-university collaboration, looking at the business side, looking at the academic side, looking at incentives, motivation, resources, capabilities, and the matching process. So if you're interested, that's available on our website. And if any of this is something that interests you, definitely we will be talking much more about it at the session tomorrow at 2 p.m., I believe. It's a workshop, it's a hands-on workshop to actually go from abstract ideas to how you apply them in your own organizations. So really thinking about how to make the programs you are working on more experimental, thinking about how to help you design intervention, experiments and tests, then help you address the questions that you are thinking about right now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Albert. I've just noticed Charles has joined us. We're late towards the end of the session, but I think we've got time for a few minutes. Charles Odie, Director General of the Small Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria. Charles, we've been working through country updates on how governments are approaching entrepreneurship, what's the state of entrepreneurship, what are the priorities. Maybe I can give you 2 minutes. That's not much, but we would love to invite you to give 2 minutes of remarks as to what your priorities are right now in Sweden.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I had to leave another session. So my name is Charles Odi. I'm the Director General of the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria. This is the agency of government that oversees the development of small businesses in Nigeria. And Nigeria has the largest amount of small and medium enterprises on the continent of Africa. As at our last count, we have approximately 39,654,385 nano, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And for us, we are an agency under the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. My Honorable Minister just left the room now, but our key priorities right now is the development of SME councils in the different states. Nigeria has 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, and what we've done right now is develop an MSME council. So if a small business has a problem in any of the states, the first point of contact is their business member organizations. If that cannot be resolved at that level, then it goes to the State Council of SMEs. At the different state levels, the different state governors are the chairpersons of the council. So we are hoping that the SME problems can be resolved at that council. And if it can't be resolved at the state, then it goes to the Federal Council. I am the secretary for the council. His Excellency, the Vice President, is the chairperson of the council. My Honorable Minister, Senator John Hwang, is the vice chair of the council. And I say to the small businesses, if the problems can be resolved at the state level, then it goes to the federal level. If it cannot be resolved at the federal level, we escalate it to the vice president. And if the vice president can't solve that small business problem, we take it to the president. I often joke that if there's no problem that the president can't solve in Nigeria, please take your problem to God. But there's been no problem that has not been resolved. And for us, the biggest problem for us right now is basically just identifying our small business owners and just mapping out interventions to solving their problems. At the last council, which held last in Q1, the biggest problem was access to finance. Finance in Nigeria is very expensive and also very scarce. And so what we're trying to do is democratize access to that finance by giving our small business owners single-digit interest rates for them to grow and expand thriving enterprises in Nigeria. Another thing is building our businesses in clusters and trying to collaborate with some of my colleagues here to see how we can help to develop those clusters where these businesses currently operate. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charles. And thank you for allowing me to spring that on you last minute. We're going to close out on a very similar discussion that we started with. With Dom, we started this session talking about maintaining the momentum of entrepreneurship policy through times of political change, be it change of governments or change of ministers. And we've had rather a big change in the US here recently. And of course, that means a slightly different path of entrepreneurship policy. So really delighted to be joined here by Victor Hwang, founder and CEO of Right to Start, the grassroots entrepreneurship campaign in the US, and by Nathan Oll, who is founder and president and CEO, sorry, of the International Economic Development Council. I'm going to hand over to the two of you to do 10 minutes to close us out on what is the next few years of entrepreneurship policy making going to look like, in your opinion, in the US? What may have changed? And what's going to be happening between the city, federal, and city, state, and federal levels? So please, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. And I should give credit to this conference for helping inspire the creation of Right to Start. It was at this conference that I saw what so many countries were doing and realized that we were missing some voice for entrepreneurship, similarly in the US. I think one thing that's been really interesting is in this, this environment in the United States is despite a lot of the narrative around the changes and maybe the unpredictability of things in the United States, there's been the emergence of entrepreneurship as a prominent national issue, which has not much greater than it's been in the past. I'll give one example is that both presidential campaigns last year, for the first time, actually made entrepreneurship a pretty significant priority in their campaigns. We saw President Trump, of course, has had plenty of major entrepreneurs that were involved in advising the campaign and talking about a lot of technological issues and innovations. The other side, Kamala Harris, actually made entrepreneurship one of the centerpiece issues within her economic opportunity agenda. And so that was actually a pretty profound difference within the United States, was to hear entrepreneurship elevated in such a prominent way. Oftentimes in the United States, entrepreneurship has often been taken for granted because it's been so endemically part of the country's economic system. But the elevation of it as a policy priority is a fairly recent phenomenon and continues to grow. And my colleague Nathan will talk a bit about how that's been taking root within the economic development sphere as well. One thing that we've seen also is because of what's been happening at the national level, there's been increasing activity at the state and local level. As many of you know, the United States is a highly decentralized federal system, which means that when the state and the local activity can remain very independently strong and doing much of its own activities, regardless of what happens at the federal level. And so our work in my organization at Right to Start has seen a tremendous adoption of activity at the state and local level of pro-entrepreneur ideas. We've seen several states within just the last few years adopt new legislation to make entrepreneurship a significant priority within their states. We've been involved in some of those policies in states like Nevada, Missouri, and Indiana. There have been a number of governors and executive branches in different states that have also picked up pro-entrepreneur reform issues as major policy agendas. And so that's continuing. We've recently launched a network of states called, it's been the first ever public sector entrepreneurship leadership network within the United States of the states. And we call that the National Entrepreneurship Leaders Network. NELN, which is a funny to say acronym. And NELN now we have a dozen states, but we're planning to involve many dozens of states, if not all 50 states at some point. And then we're also later going to expand it to involve cities as well. But that's the new momentum that's been building has been the peer learning between states that are trying to build different pro-entrepreneur activities, which is an exciting development. Another element within this has been, and there was some talk around how you do messaging in an era of polarization, and we can talk a bit about the importance of narrative and messaging within the United States environment. Entrepreneurship, when you poll the public, which we've done, you find tremendously deep roots in entrepreneurial support. It's a very deep cultural issue in the United States. When we asked Americans if entrepreneurship and access to entrepreneurial opportunity was fundamental to the future of the United States, 94% of Americans said it was important to the future of the country, which is an extraordinary bipartisan approach to entrepreneurship. Yet, interestingly enough, when you poll the same people about what are the most important issues in the United States, entrepreneurship and small business was not necessarily a very high issue, which means that what's happened is we've actually not been able to link link entrepreneurship to the economic and national strength of the country. And so that's actually been a narrative shift that we've been working on and have started to see tremendous results as a part of that. So even the very calling our organization Right to Start, by calling it entrepreneurship as a fundamental rights issue as opposed to just merely an issue that helps entrepreneurs or an issue that helps small businesses, we've seen that resonate very deeply in the United States, is by talking about entrepreneurship as a basic human right. The other aspect of the work is by being able to talk about it with language that appeals to both sides. So in certain groups, for instance, on the left, they like to talk about entrepreneurship in terms of equity and access, inclusivity, and being able to lift up those who are left behind. When we talk about issues on the right with entrepreneurship, it's often around freedom, empowerment, liberty, and these issues that actually have a deep appeal on the right. And so we actually use those different types of language that either appeal to one side or the other at the right times, or we use things that talk about it right down the middle. And we find language that actually appeals deeply to people's innate sense of being able to create and forge their own futures. So that kind of languaging is really critical, and we're finding more and more interest in talking about entrepreneurship in a way that actually transcends the partisanship and using new language that may not necessarily tie entrepreneurship to some of the issues of the past. I will also talk about one final note, and I hand it over to my colleague Nathan, which is that given this issue, importance of messaging and narrative and some of the deep polarization issues in the United States, we've been focused a lot on unification and trying to create a unifying message around the country. And it just happens that next year, 2026, is the 250th birthday of the United States, and we're calling it the startup birthday of America. And so as part of that, we're about to announce, and this will be later on tomorrow, we're going to have a groundbreaking ceremony to announce a national campaign for America's 250th birthday that we call America the Entrepreneurial, which is similar to the name America the Beautiful, which is a famous phrase and song in the United States. So America the Entrepreneurial will be a campaign in celebration of the 250th startup birthday, which will focus on renewing America's entrepreneurial promise to all of its citizens and linking the resurgence of entrepreneurship to the future and strength of this country. And so the idea being that when the entrepreneurial spirit thrives, then the whole nation thrives. And so we're going to be making that campaign wide and working with organizations across the country to adopt that and disseminate that and get people to talk about this issue. So, Nathan.
Thank you, Victor. I'm Nathan Oley, President and CEO of the International Economic Development Council, and appreciate the honor to be with all of you today. As Victor talked about, it's been a uncertain last 4 months as we've had a new administration coming into the United States, but the commitment to entrepreneurship and to small business growth in the United States has been unwavering for decades. The work that the federal government in partnership with states, as Victor talked about, has been critical to building those ecosystems and allowing for entrepreneurs, small business owners to grow and thrive in communities of all sizes across the United States. And that commitment will remain regardless of administration and changes. There are obviously some priorities that this administration, the Trump administration, is going to push forward. We do a lot of work in DC at the federal level here in the United States to try and help advocate and lift the voice of economic developers and entrepreneurs in policy discussions. The Trump administration, while they're only 4 months in, have indicated they've got a specific focus, obviously, on driving deglobalization and free market thinking, which means that the federal government is going to have a slightly different role in supporting entrepreneurship and supporting policies that will drive and create opportunity for entrepreneurs to grow and thrive in the United States. They have a very specific focus on driving opportunity through the private sector in particular. You will start to see investments in research and development that are more driven towards the private sector than they might have been in the past. You will also see a focus specifically on tax reform, deregulation, creating opportunities for business owners and entrepreneurs to cut through the red tape from a federal government process and to make sure that there's more opportunities to drive small business growth as a result of that. And certainly there's going to be a big focus here in the United States on AI, quantum, technology, and ensuring that the United States can continue to focus on those things and be a leader in those areas. And how do you help entrepreneurs, especially on the AI side in particular, drive opportunity, utilize AI, and certainly continue to be the leaders in AI technology and reform. I will also say the vice president has a background in venture capital, and so that you do have an advocate from someone who has been in this space in the past. And Congress has a deep commitment to this work. So in the United States, you have a balance between the administration and Congress in how they fund programs and priorities. There is a entrepreneurial caucus within the United States Congress. There's a deep commitment to the programs and funding that have existed for decades in many cases. And in particular, the last 5 years, we've seen a historic level of investment from the federal government. The important piece will be that connection between the federal government and the states, especially over the next 3.5 to 4 years. Victor and his team and lots of advocates across states, across the United States, have done a tremendous job in getting states to the point where they recognize and understand the commitment that they need to make sure they can drive entrepreneurship in their own states. And that's going to be critical to making sure that that commitment continues throughout the next 3 years.
Fantastic, with 42 seconds to go as well. Thank you to Victor and Nathan. Thank you to all of those that have spoken today. Apologies to those that we could not make space for. As I said earlier, this is a smattering of insights from as many people as possible to give you the sense of vibrancy and activity across the Startup Nations policy community. We invite policymakers and advocates to join the Startup Nations community if you're not part of it. As you've heard, many of our international organizations and Gen Knowledge partners are hosting sessions over the coming days that we very highly encourage you to participate in. And that leaves me to wrap up and conclude the Startup Nations annual meeting. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of conference.